I'd like to say we appreciate your presence here this evening. Hopefully the things that I have to say will be things that will be beneficial to us. You know, several years ago I mentioned that I'd taken or that I had the experience of with a management evaluation system in which they it was new at the time that I was subjected to it, but I thought it was quite a novel thing that they allowed me to participate in setting the goals that I would be judged by each quarter and then eventually at the end of the year. And so I thought it was a very good thing that you could set your goals, and it turned out that it was very good because through the quarter you could go over and say, well, how far am I from where I'm supposed to be, and you could make some quick adjustments maybe, or see that you're not doing what you're supposed to and change the way you were doing it, and hopefully by the end of the year you would have made some good changes and things would be a lot better for you. And so I appreciated that opportunity to be proactive in that way toward my evaluation, and made you feel better that that you had some say in what was going on. And at the same time, I learned that by having some sort of plan before you, or a blueprint, or whatever you want to call it, that it helped you because it reminded you of things that you needed to do. And so this evening, for just a little while, I know you've had a long day and a very busy day, and so I'm going to try not to keep you here very long. I'm going to try to run through this pretty quick. But I thought by way of bringing back things that would help us in elements of our lives as we serve God. As I thought about this, and you can see the title of my lesson is Prepare. And as I thought about this, I thought about this fellow named Robert Baden-Powell, who Jerry and them probably know who this is. The last few weeks I've been subjected to scouts, and so I'm going to lean on that this evening for a little bit anyway. But Robert Baden-Powell was the founder of the organization known as the Boy Scouts, and in 1908. And in that year, he published the first handbook of the Boy Scouts, and in there he published the fact that the motto for that group would be prepared. And I suppose throughout all the years, and even till now, that motto still remains part of that organization. And that's a very good motto, to be prepared. There can never be something wrong with that. And through the years, that organization has instilled in many a person the concept of, hey, at least try to prepare what you can and do the best you can at preparing at whatever is before you. And that's a good thing for us to learn how to be prepared. And so for a little while this evening, I want to discuss this. But centuries ago, as I read the Bible, we find that God counseling Moses, and through Moses, and said to Israel that to be prepared and to be ready. In Exodus, the 34th chapter, in the first two verses, this is kind of a light side of a reading, really, because God, it says there, and the Lord said unto Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. And be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai, and present thyself there to me in the top of the mount. I think that's kind of light-hearted to me when I think about get Moses standing before God, and God said, those tables that you broke the other day? Well, you go cut you out 2 more, and we're going to make some more for you, okay, since you broke those 2. And so Moses stood before God and was counseled by God to bring some tablets, and he was going to write some commandments and some precepts for the children of Israel. And in doing that, you read there, you find that God also counseled with Moses how the people should stay away from the mountain, because God's going to come down on that mountain, and it's just going to be him and God on that mountain. Now, I would like to ask you something. If tomorrow someone was to say to you, well, the President of the United States is coming down tomorrow, and he's requested that you and him meet in the library over here. And he's going to want to talk to you about various topics that are of importance to him. How many of you would probably do something like start reading things about, what it is that President Biden wants to do here? Because if I have an opportunity, I certainly want to voice to him what my opinion is, or maybe I want to voice that I'm all for what he wants to do or something. But you would prepare, wouldn't you? And so I can't imagine Moses, after having stood there before God, and God says, you come up tomorrow morning And you and I are going to have a conference. And I'm going to give you some laws and some commandments. And you know Moses would have gone and said, well, you know what, prepared himself for God. I better be on my best game when I go up there to stand in that mountain. Just being in the presence of God, you know, when you consider the things that they did to Moses, how it turned his hair, you know, white and things of that nature, and he glistened when he came off the mountain and things of that nature. That had to be quite a time for him to think about and to consider what God had said to him that he was going to do to him. And so this evening for a little while I want to talk about prepare, how you and I can prepare. And I want to cover three elements that I think impact our lives very significantly. First of all, I think you and I should be counseled and concerned about being prepared to walk with God. That's a very important element. Secondly, I think we should be prepared to worship God. That's another element that we find to be very significant and at the same time beneficial to you and me. And the third one is prepare to meet God. Now, I want you to notice something about these three things. I was thinking about this. You know, the first one, prepare to walk with God. There are days when things happen in the world that the furthest thing from my mind is to walk with God. You know? To think about when events happen at the time, what am I going to say? When a question is asked, how am I going to answer that? In what tone am I going to answer that? Will I think about the way that God tells me how I ought to answer something and what tone I ought to use and how merciful I ought to be? Or will I just say, well, I'll just answer the question on my own? And then I think about preparing to worship God. Well, you know, sometimes and when I observe people, they can take it or leave it. They can come to worship God, or they can feel pretty comfortable not being here. And so that's something that you can make a decision on. But you know what? When you look at the third one, that's not something you're going to make a decision on. That's not something you're going to be able to say, well, I can skate by that one for a while. Because someday you're going to be called. Just like Moses was called to come up and to talk with God, someday you and I are going to be called to meet with God. And therefore, I think these three elements are very important in the lives that we live. So first of all, as we begin this evening, let's talk about being prepared to walk with God. In Micah, the 6th chapter and 8th verse, a verse that y'all all know I like very much, Micah wrote, he said, he had showed thee, O man, what is good and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God. When I think about the times when perhaps life has dealt me blows after blows, or when life is very hard, I think about how concise these instructions from God are to mankind. How that he tells us how to get our lives together in a very quick and very summary type form. He said, listen, this is what I expect of you. This is what I require of you. You learn to do justly. You learn to do things in a just way. As you deal with others, as you converse with others, you do that in a just way, in a right way, in a way that's beneficial to the person that you're doing business with or talking to. You learn, he says, how to have mercy. And understand, by having mercy, I've already explained to you that if you'll show mercy, then I will show mercy to you on that day. And then he says, and you learn to walk humbly with me. Brandon went over some things this morning about Jesus and the things that happened to him and the things that he did. And when we think about how the things that we have done have impacted Jesus' life, how can we not help but be humble and say, man, look at the havoc that I've created. How can I not listen to God with humility and walk with him in a way that he wants me to? And so God counseled you and me many years ago, counseled Israel, and those words still stand today. Perhaps the commandments have changed somewhat, but still the general command to walk after his commandments and his precepts are there. To do justly, that never did change. To show mercy, God's all about mercy still. And to walk humbly with him will always be a charge you and I can take and live with. In the book of Deuteronomy, the 5th chapter and the 33rd verse, as God talked to Israel about this, he said, "You shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God had commanded you, that you may live, and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which ye shall possess." Zach sung a song this evening that says, "Where we shall never grow old." I think that was kind of it was kind of different to me, because here we're talking about the Lord's trying to convince us that to do things in such a way as to prolong our days, to live long lives, and to grow old. And yet we sing a song because we look forward to a land where we won't see all the bad things that come with growing old. But you know, if people were to take to heart the concept that they want to live more years than not, then they should listen to what God has to say. They should listen to what God counseled Israel and said, you know, if you want to see those long days, then you learn to walk with me. You learn to live your life each moment that you live, and put me in that life of yours, and make me the person you turn to make the good decisions that cause you to be just, that cause you to be humble, that cause you to show mercy. In the book of Joshua, the 22nd chapter and the 5th verse, Joshua said, "But take diligent heed to do the commandment of the law, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, charged you, to love your God, to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, and to cleave unto him, to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." And so you see that just as Boy Scouts are being told continuously, be prepared, God throughout the ages have said to his people, you need to learn to prepare. You need to learn to be ready. Whether it's tomorrow morning when I'm going to have a meeting with you, or on the day of judgment when you must stand before me and be judged of me, be prepared, be ready for that day and for that event. In 2 Kings, the 10th chapter, the 30th and the 31st verse, "And the Lord said unto Jehu, Because thou hast done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, and hast done unto the house of Ahab according to all that was in mine heart, thy children of the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel." But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart, for he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel to sin. Now we may think that it's not that hard to walk with God. It's not that, not that difficult. But here's an example of an individual who didn't do that. And you see that he caused a great deal of pain and suffering. And I'm sure it cost him dearly for the things that he did. In the book of John, the 6th chapter, 66th verse, and I think Brandon read this morning, there it says, "From that time, many of the disciples went back and walked no more with him." And so there comes a time in life, perhaps, when things are not all that they're cracked up to be, or not what we think they should be. And we have difficulties. And here we see people who walked in the very presence of the Son of God. It is said of them, they went back and they didn't want to walk with him anymore. They didn't want no part of it. And we sit here today and go like, man, I can't imagine that. If I was around Jesus, man, I think I'd want to be around him every minute of the day. I'd want to make sure that I'm doing all the right things. He could help me with those things. And yet, it's the way we are as humans. And so we're warned by God to prepare to walk with him. It's not an easy road, perhaps. It's not an easy thing. But it's certainly something that if we will practice, it will bring a lot of good to you and me. And it will be it will be something that will be of benefit to you and me. Secondly, the second area that I want to talk about is be prepared to worship God. In Matthew, the 4th chapter and the 10th verse, "Then said Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." And so now in the New Testament times, or in the times of Jesus, you and I are hear of the words of the Son of God saying, the only person you should be worshiping is God. And yet we find that there are so many things that can take our attention away from our service to God. There are so many things that it may not be a golden, calf or some other idol that we worship, but it could be other things that are very important to us that take us away from God, and those things serve to be the idols that take us away from God. And Jesus said, that's wrong. God says that's not to happen. That we ought to be prepared. We ought to be careful that this kind of situation doesn't happen. In the book of John, the 4th chapter, the 23rd to the 24th verse, Jesus said, "But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipper shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such as to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." I wonder sometimes if God looks down at the worship service that I'm involved in, does he consider my service to be one that is spirited and one that is deeply rooted in truth? I hope he does, and I hope he does for you too. In the book of Psalm, in the 122nd and the first verse, the psalmist there wrote, "I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord." Now, when I think about that, about what was said there, I consider that it's a very rare thing to read or to see or to know someone who approaches, the service to God in a glad way. When they said, I was glad when they said, go to the house of the Lord. Several years ago, Brenda and I were in Massachusetts, and we ran into this brethren over in Greenfield, and man, he happened to catch my attention. And every time I go back there, I don't know that he goes there anymore, but every time I went back that he was there, I couldn't help but notice that he had a grin on his face, a big old smile on his face. A fellow from Africa and a brethren from Africa. And it's infectious. If you ever saw this person, you'd go, wow, he's enjoying himself. Man, he's in it, and he was. And it was interesting to see it. But I kind of envisioned that as the psalmist David wrote here about this kind of thing, being glad to be in the house of the Lord. And David in other places, like in the 84th Psalm, he would say things like, he was in love with the tabernacles that were in the house of God. He loved to stand in the courts in the temple of God. He thought the environment that was presented there was one that was just beyond belief, according to David. And he enjoyed his time in that temple of God and serving God. No wonder. Some say this may not have been written by David, but if it was, no wonder he would have written this, considering his feelings toward that environment that he found himself in the house of God. He said he'd rather spend a day in the house of God than 1,000 in the tents of the wicked. David thought a lot of his service to God and what it ought to be made of, and how he ought to be glad that he had the opportunity, just the opportunity to be there. And when I think about that, many rarely go to the house of the Lord. Now, today is a day that a lot of people who very rarely attend services probably attended church today, I assume. But of those who go regularly and frequently to church, how many could say they are glad to have that opportunity that someone said, come on, let's go to the house of the Lord? Is that a rare thing? I think probably so. It's not something that we just, automatically come to. But nonetheless, it made me think about, what our service, our worship service to God ought to look like, that we ought to be a little bit more into it, a little bit more spirited, a little bit more concerned about how we serve God. He's a spirit, and he wants us to worship him in spirit and in truth. He's holy, the scriptures say. And when I think of something holy, I think of something that's sacred and something that's not to be taken lightly, something that ought to be very seriously minded, considered as we engage in it. Whenever I think about some of the things that happen to us, perhaps the lack of being prepared to worship God causes many to attend based on the premise that it's out of a sense of duty. I feel like, God's told me I've got to do it, so I got to be there. So I come. Or perhaps it's because I want to uphold a religious reputation. People think of me as being a very religious person, or a person that attends church regularly, and I can't let them, see that that's not really who I am. And so therefore I come because of that reason. Or perhaps I do it just out of a force of habit. I've been doing this for 50 years, and so I walk through the doors every time they're open. Or perhaps it's just to set a good example. I've got 18 grandkids. I have an opportunity to set a good example for a lot of people. I hope that's not why I do this. I hope that I'm genuinely concerned about my service to God. And I hope my grandkids see that. And I hope they emulate that rather than being a good example, or just being a good example only. And so I hope we'll think about our worship service to God. In the book of Jeremiah, the 16th chapter, the 11th through the 13th verse, he said, "Then shalt thou say unto me, because your fathers have forsaken me, saith the Lord, and have walked after other gods, and have served them and worshipped them, and have forsaken me, and have not kept my law, and ye have done worse than your fathers. For behold, ye walk every one of you after the imagination of his evil heart, that they may not hearken unto me. Therefore will I cast you out of this land into a land that you know not, neither ye nor your fathers, and there shall you serve other gods day and night, where I will not show you favor." That happened to Israel. That happened to Judah because of that very reason that God talked about, that they polluted the worship service to God. They made it of none effect. Of course, we're familiar with Matthew, the 15th chapter, the 8th through the 9th verse, where Jesus said, "This people draweth nigh unto me and with their mouth, draw nigh unto me with their mouth, and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men." And so there's a real need to prepare, to evaluate, to make whatever changes we need to make sure that the task of preparing to worship God in a proper way is done as best as we can. And if we can, let's reach the gold standard. Let's walk in through the back doors with a smile from ear to ear, glad to be here to serve God. The last element that I want to talk about is we need to be prepared to meet God. In Amos, the 4th chapter, in the 10th through the 12th verse, Amos said, I have sent among you the pestilence after the manner of Egypt. Your young men have I slain with the sword, and have taken away your horses. And I have made the stink of your camps to come up to your nostrils. Yet you have not returned unto me, saith the Lord. I have overthrown some of you as God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And you were as a firebrand and plucked out of the burning. Yet have you not returned unto me, saith the Lord. Therefore thus will I do unto thee, O Israel, because I will do this unto thee, prepare to meet thy God. You know, God told Israel and Judah, there's coming a day you'll lose all that's before you, the land that you inherited, the pleasant situation that you were in. But there's also coming a day you're going to stand before me in judgment. You better prepare to meet me. You better make good on the life that I've given you and the things that I've asked you to do, because those are the very things that I'm going to ask you about in the day of judgment. And so you better be prepared to meet me. In Amos, the 4th chapter and the 13th verse, he went on to say, For lo, he that formeth the mountains and created this wind, and declared unto man what is his thought, that maketh the morning darkness and treadeth upon the high places of the earth, the Lord, the God of hosts, is his name. You know, people ought to understand and ought to take note of who they're dealing with and the power and the position that God Almighty has in the lives that we live. Now, Amos said he's able to create these mountains out of nothing. He's able to make the wind blow where we don't even know where it comes from. We hear it, we feel it, but we don't know where it comes from. And yet God causes that to happen. Such a God is God. Holy. And he says that the God of hosts is his name. And so you and I better be prepared to meet such a force in the end. In Hebrews, the 10th chapter, the 30th through the 31st verse, he said, For we know him that had said, Vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. You know, we read here just a little while earlier what God said to Israel about their preparation. and how that if they're prepared, he said some things about what he would do to them. But I wonder about our preparation when he considers our preparation, and what are we preparing for? Are we prepared for God to show us favor and provide us with eternal life in heaven? I hope we all are. I hope that's what we're hoping for. I hope that excites us, and says, man, that's where I want to be. But have we prepared for this? What if we stand before God and we haven't made the preparations that we need to? And instead of showing us favor, God says, you know what? I'm not going to show you any favor because you failed to walk with me. You failed to worship me the way that I ordered you to. And here you stand this day, face to face with me, and I will not show you favor. I will not distribute to you mercy. Instead, you will receive eternal damnation. What a terrible thing for us to fall into the hands of the living God that has that kind of capability and can do that to you and me. These are all the things that I wish to say this evening. I hope that the things that I've said will serve as a reminder to us all that, well, I'd like to go back perhaps, well, never mind. The one thing that I've had on there that I wanted to say was that, you know what the difference is between favor and not favor? It's the preparation that we attend to, isn't it? Because if you and I attend to the preparation that God has asked us to do, we'll receive the favor. We'll receive mercy. We'll receive the salvation that we look for. And so I hope that we'll consider preparation and be prepared like the Scouts wants us to be and like the God of heaven wants us to be prepared to meet Him in that day, people that are ready to meet their God. The lesson is yours. If you're here this evening, you've been taught sufficiently concerning the principle, the first principle of the oracle of God. You're prepared to believe, to repent, to confess, to be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. We stand ready to help you this evening, or if you're here and you desire the prayers of the church, why don't you come while we stand and sing the song that's been selected.